Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. I don't think I even have to say what's on the agenda tonight. It's been a wild couple of days. To discuss the implementation of the UK-EU Treaty over Gibraltar, I'm flanked by heavyweights. Former Chief Minister Sir Peter Caruana, Chief Minister Fabian Picardo and Chronicle editor Brian Reyes. We're taking your questions too. Remember, we're live, so please keep them short and to the point. So, Peter, if I can start with you. We've been hearing the word surreal to describe the past few days. They really have been, haven't they?
Well, I haven't been doing much of the heavy lifting. There are other people around this table that can talk, but it's been a momentous 3 or 4 days. I mean, these scenes in Brussels were, I think, important for Gib. I think the events in Gibraltar, the signing of the treaty and the signing, the provisional coming into effect, and everything that now we have in front of us by way of opportunity, and the events of the physical events of Gibraltar yesterday. I was there, and people were there, not so much celebrating on the Gibraltar side, but conscious that they were watching history being made and savouring that, sort of almost history maker watchers rather than celebrators. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed seeing people in Gibraltar able to understand the significance of what is happening, embracing it with the sort of confidence and self-assuredness in our ability to take care of ourselves in the future that has characterized Gibraltar for generations and generations, and conscious that there are opportunities ahead of us to be seized.
Did we expect that, though? Did you expect that reaction?
I did. I remember as a child being 10 years old and seeing on television the events of 1982. I still remember the voice of David Hoare in my head, no doubt because you've repeated it so often that I think I remember it from when I was 10. But I was very conscious that people would be expecting a moment like that. And on the evening, when I arrived at the airport terminal for the reception at 10:30, it didn't feel like it was like that. But I knew that Gibraltar would, at the last minute, as it often does, rally to be there. Because as Peter says, people wanted to be eyewitnesses to history. They wanted to be eyewitnesses to our good history. They wanted to be there in the same way as their grandfathers or parents would have been there in '69 when it closed and in '82 when it opened. And this was a moment which I think everybody understood was going to be like that.
I think when people started crossing over to Spain was what really struck me.
Yeah, I mean, I think surreal is the best word for it. Emotive. I was in the middle of the border just before what used to be the Spanish Policía Nacional immigration check, and there was a line of police officers holding everybody back on the Spanish side, flags, chants, and so on. And there was a line of police holding people back on the Gib side. And I've covered a lot of things at the border, some nasty things at the border. So have you, riots and so on. And there was a moment where I thought, oh my God, this.
I was going to ask that whether you felt he was going to get held.
Well, there was a 10-second.
We were unlucky about the.
We're just watching some images at the moment.
There was a 10-second thing just before the masses were unleashed, and then when they came together, it just changed. Yeah. It just changed, and it was a very powerful moment.
And it went totally the other way, with suddenly, vivan los vecinos, vivan los llanitos.
Can I just tell you something that I saw last night? I was busy working late because I had the budget reply today. Peter knows what it's like. And I finished watching the England match, and I put on Televisión Española 24 horas just to get me through a couple more hours of work. And at midnight, Javi Fortes, who had been here, started to do a short report about Gibraltar after they'd finished covering the football. And he said something which I didn't expect. He said, look, he said to the other people, the tertulianos, I've covered many things in the past. I've covered the top sporting events and the top political events in Spain, some tense moments, some happy moments. Last night, the event I covered will be, for me, the most important and emotive event I have ever been involved with. That's really quite remarkable from the senior broadcast journalist on Televisión Española 24 horas, that he felt, like we felt, that we were dealing with something special that will never come again. And perhaps there was that feeling that it could all go wrong because of the football, etc. That might have heightened our emotions, but people knew people always inevitably do, people knew what that moment was for and about, and they came together in the way that the moment called for.
So we hear the word historic, the phrase a start to a new era. What is this new era? How can it be described?
Well, it can be described, in my view, best as a chance. I mean, we use words like opportunity when we're talking in political jargon. But really what this is, Christine, is a chance. It's a chance to change everything that we have been through and everything that we knew was almost inevitable, that there should be always problems there. This is a chance to do something different, to turn that area into a place that Brian already said tonight, perhaps unconsciously. They were standing in the place where the Guardia Civil post used to be.
Yes.
It's already used to be. But it's also a chance to recast the relationship with Spain. Perhaps we will go up and down on this, because there might be a change of government in Spain. Things might be better, less better. Last night again, in the heat of the England-Argentina match, Partido Popular issued a press statement at the sort of time you would issue a press statement if you didn't want many people to follow it, saying, actually, this deal is not the best deal, but not saying we're going to undo it the minute that we're elected. So I think everybody understands that there is a moment, and we must all be up to the moment in a way that might not be what we have been used to in the past. So, I mean, I intend to dial down my rhetoric a little, because I can sense that the other side are dialing down their rhetoric. And we have a responsibility now, all of us, to nurture this treaty and nurture this chance to turn it into something that becomes the snowball that is rolling down the hill and becomes unstoppable. And the Gibraltarians are a huge part of delivering that.
How would you describe the treaty? Is it a reset? Is it an opportunity, a chance?
I think it's a lot. But just to comment on the last point, the Partido Popular's reaction, I think the Partido Popular is quietly breathing a sigh of relief that the PSOE has done this deal. They can criticise them and tell them what a terrible deal it is, but quietly relieved that when they next come into office, they will find that this obstacle to relations with Britain no longer exists for them to have to grapple with. I think they are. I don't speak about Vox, but about the Partido Popular, I think that they are quite really... Look, it's a chance for lots of things. It's a chance for lots of... Amongst them, it's a chance for us to demonstrate, and I say this because I know that there are people, understandably, with an element of concern about this, but I think it's a chance for us to demonstrate that our identity and our self-confidence as a people and who we are and what we are determined to carry on being does not depend on us sheltering behind a frontier fence. I mean, it's as simple as that. Spain will realise that Gibraltar will stay as resilient and as self-assured and as friendly and as cooperative with its neighbour as we have always been and manifested ourselves to being. And I do not see this as a threat. I see this as opportunity. As I said the other night on Newswatch, we have to remain vigilant because, as Fabian says, there are changes of government in Spain. There are things in these arrangements, as you would expect them to have to be, but in the wrong hands, deployed for the wrong purposes or with the wrong animo, will increase the number of things that we see that we don't like. But nevertheless, we've got to accept that. These are things that wouldn't matter if there wasn't a sovereignty claim over us. You know, the Portuguese people wouldn't blink an eyelid if they saw a Spanish police car, 200 yards across the border in Portugal. We are rightly anxious a bit because of the sovereignty claim and the history of the treaty,
yes,
and the
the
history of the relationship.
The trust issue.
The trust issue. But I think we've got to understand that so long as we are vigilant and not allow people on Spain to abuse it, I think that there is a huge opportunity for us now. And I have no doubt that this is what motivated the decision on the government's part to go down this road in the first place, which is to ensure that the correct environment exists for our future generations of Gibraltarians to have the opportunity to enjoy the same socio-economic prosperity as we have been able to enjoy during the EU years and during the years that we were building the economy.
Can I violently agree with Peter on something? And I think it's very important.
Oh goodness, that's a first.
I think it's important that people. But I think it's important that people understand that we are on the same page, and that I think the parties that he has represented and I represent are on the same page on one particular thing, which I've read a little about, and people mustn't for one moment worry about. Look, the Gibraltarian identity is strong and it's resilient. The Gibraltarian identity is not so fragile that it depends on hiding behind a fence so that nobody touches it. The Gibraltarian identity can stretch its hand across that frontier and across to London and across to the United States and everywhere else and defend itself, even though it might be influenced by new influences in the future. That's not going to change who we are. It's not going to change the fibre of the Britishness that makes us up and creates that magnificent Gibraltarian that we are. And the idea that somehow that is at risk, well, look, I never considered that my Gibraltarian identity was at risk because I might go to a restaurant in Guadiaro and I might be in contact with somebody of a different culture. And if I do it more or less in the future, it's not going to change my Gibraltarian identity. Far from it. We must have the confidence to say, this is the opportunity for the Gibraltarian identity to grow. That's what we need to be saying.
I've done a lot of radio this week, and that was a question that I was asked a number of times, and I had to explain, look, we're not English, we're British, Mediterranean British, and we're a cosmopolitan society that has multiple nationalities and roots stretching across the Mediterranean and North Africa. It's like, I mean, that's not going to change.
Of course.
That's not going to
Chief
change.
Minister, can I have one for you? The demolition of the frontier has meant a massive step in the negotiations that you've been involved in over the last 5 years. Do you think people have grasped how all-consuming it's been?
I don't think people have understood how all-consuming it's been, because it has been all-consuming, and then people have been, at the same time, look, I was in Brussels. You were showing the plane taking off, Brussels, you were live in the Berlaymont and all the rest of it, and I was receiving WhatsApps and emails about things going wrong in people's homes and things that they wanted. As Peter has always said when he's described it, the Chief Minister of Gibraltar is 1 minute drafting a speech for the United Nations, next talking to the Foreign Secretary, and at the next moment, your secretary is popping her head in saying, Baki's on the phone because she's got a problem with her shutters and her boiler isn't working. These days, Baki doesn't go through Centrex. Baki's got your mobile, and she's telling you this as you're waiting to see Sefcovic sign with Doughty the Gibraltar Treaty. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been all-consuming. It has been all-consuming. And therefore, in political terms, when you get as close as we got last time to losing the election, you understand that actually people might be very supportive of what you're doing on the international front. But if you haven't fixed the boiler and you haven't got time to talk to them about their shutter, it's a problem. And it's been all-consuming at work, it's been all-consuming in the family, it's been all-consuming in every single respect. But you talked about something which I think it's important to have people understand the concepts of. Because we've had to put many concepts upside down and inside out in order to achieve what we've achieved. Removing the frontier was something that we have to do to remove all physical barriers, the demolition of the frontier. But it was always also the biggest threat that we could put on the table. Because imagine, if we had no deal and we had a Schengen hard border and it was our frontier and we removed it, what would have had to happen then? Spain would have been required by the European Union to erect a frontier in the place where she has always said there should not be a frontier. So the concepts were very fluid, and the biggest threat that we could put on the table when things were not going well, and they were telling us that there was going to, unfortunately, be a hard frontier, was to say, OK, well, you'll have to put it up because we think the time has come to bring it down.
What was the worst moment? Can you tell us what was the most difficult moment in that whole process?
Look, I've got a book to sell. I'll have to...
give us a teaser.
Look, we're not at ratification yet. I think it's important that one of the things that we respect is the confidence of the negotiation and the trust that we built between the negotiating partners. I used to say something which was a little bit out there for a Gibraltar GSLP chief minister to be saying. I was saying to people, and I repeat tonight, as I've said now for the past 3 or 4 years, we have built negotiating trust. Now, you say that in Gibraltar circles, and the first thing they'll tell you is, you're trusting a Spaniard? What, are you mad? Well, actually, you can't get to a final negotiation that resolves the issue if you don't trust each other around the table. And what you've had for the past 4.5 years is almost zero leaks. Almost zero leaks. People were asking about whether the issue was where the policeman was going to be sitting or not where the policeman was going to be sitting, because you actually didn't know what the issues were, because we weren't leaking, they weren't leaking, there was nothing leaking anywhere.
There was a breath of fresh air in Brussels this time. I think nobody had the cards to their chest in the negotiations. They didn't want to, so it was Why are you all laughing?
I'm biting my tongue.
Don't bite your tongue. We're not here to bite tongues.
No, my own.
No, but
Bite it.
No. Who would like to ask for Christine?
You don't have to bite your tongue.
No, I'm delighted to hear Fabian speak in these terms.
Well, but look, it's a different world. Brexit changed our world, and it changed our reality. It pulled us out of the comfort into which we had the opportunity and the luck to lull ourselves into, because we were members of the biggest trading club in the world, and we'd got there before Spain in 1972, and we had bespoke terms of membership, and Peter, like Joe and I, suffered the EU not being loyal in the defence of those terms, and sometimes, exhibiting a neutrality which was not neutrality and was going towards the Spanish. But we were members of the club. There was a lot that we could do.
Do you think you set the scene for all this?
I take the view that one act of establishing normality leads to another and leads to another, and what you achieve here would not have been possible if somebody had not taken the steps in the run-up to the trilateral process, which was based on the very recognitions that Fabian has just finished articulating so eloquently, were precisely designed, if for no other reason, to try and establish comfort, trust, relationship, normality, getting Spanish ministers used to thinking it normal of sitting around a table with a Gibraltar chief minister or a Gibraltar minister and dialoguing about problems that affect them both. And look, perhaps Fabian is right, perhaps Brexit created this necessity, and necessity is the mother of all invention, and they might have been able to achieve it even if nothing had come before it.
But there was a prelude.
I think so. All forms of dialogue. It didn't start with me. It didn't start with a trilateral. All forms.
It's also true that in that process in that timeline of towards normality and towards that trust, there was a period, I'm thinking of the Margallo period, where everything was undone.
Yes, but let's not forget that Miguel Ángel Moratinos, the serving Spanish foreign minister, came to Gibraltar.
I know, but there was a period beyond that where everything was undone, and I think, going back to the Pepe Vox issue that we were discussing earlier, I think that is what a lot of people are concerned about, that a change in Spain, in the political landscape in Spain, even if the PP, and I agree with you, I don't think the PP is going to rush in and undo this. No. I think that you're right in saying that there'll be the
unless the Vox demands it of them, and as the price of support,
and that is the problem.
But I think you've said a lot that I think I would like to unpack, if you'll allow me. First of all, I think that if PP are pushed by Vox, and that is the price of forming government in Spain, then Vox might up the ante and PP might follow them. But I would expect that there'll be more a raising of the rhetoric than actually doing much.
From Vox as well?
Because, of course, you've got the issue that it is the UK and the EU. And the EU wants a good relationship with the UK. This is part of the reset. And the EU will not lightly allow Vox and Partido Popular to undo this. That's why I'm saying, in all of the interviews I'm giving, that we have to be very careful about our obligations under the treaty. We have to be very loyal in what we do. We must never give an excuse for anybody to point to Gibraltar as the party that has failed to comply with one of the international legal obligations that the United Kingdom has acquired for us under the treaty. But I want to come to the point that Peter was making, because I think it's important that we recognise this. I don't think that we would have been able to get to where we've got to, at least this quickly, without the trilateral having been there. And the fascinating thing about the trilateral and what Brian was talking about in terms of Margallo is that I think in the end it all worked well for us. So you establish the trilateral, which I think if we were having a partisan discussion, I would point to what I see as the flaws in, but it worked. And you had a chief minister sitting around the table with a Spanish foreign minister and a British foreign minister. You then have the alternative, which is non-recognition. And that makes the next generation of the socialist politicians in Spain be bolder, perhaps even than the earlier bold generation like Moratinos, and be ready to go further. Because remember that in this process, we haven't just had trilateral and quadrilateral meetings, we've had bilateral meetings. And the word bilateral is a word that we hate in Gibraltar, but not when the bilateralism is Gibraltar directly with Spain. Because that's recognition also of us as interlocutors of certain of the things that were on the table. So I credit Peter for having achieved the trilateral. I credit him for having set one of the foundations of what we have built on today. I think all of us have achieved in office different parts of the communication that you need there. Joe, in some instances, had to hold the line, which was also an important part of getting to the trilateral. And all of us build on the shoulders of each other, and I look forward to somebody coming and doing more than we've done.
There is a domestic aspect, Fabian, of the importance of the trilateral. That, I mean, before embarking on the trilateral process, which was only a political process, it wasn't even, as you know, treaty or legal making like this, there was a local heavy lifting job to be done. We had to change the mindset of people in Gibraltar to feel safe with their political leadership talking to the Spaniards about problems. It wasn't, even that was not a given in Gibraltar, but especially not with the opposition, railing against dialogue. But
look at the parallels. Look at the parallels. That only came about because of joint sovereignty. So joint sovereignty opened the door for you to do the constitution and the trilateral. And Brexit and the terrible Malgaio years opened the door for us to do this next step forward.
So you both needed catalysts.
And we now both agree that the airport is great.
Yes, we both agree?
Yes.
Well, the fact that it's constructed there has come in useful.
Oh, I'll settle for that.
I'm loving this programme. I mean,
implementation might have taken a little longer.
You've heard this first on GBC. So, Peter, if you'd been at the negotiating table, what would you have done differently?
It's an impossible question to answer. I can't tell you if I would have done better, and I can't tell you if I wouldn't have done as well.
Would you have prioritised something else? Or?
No, you know, the problem with these negotiations is that when you start, you don't have every step, as I think has already been said before me, programmed. So issues arise, problems are put in your path, matters need to be resolved, things have to be researched, and you have to form your view on things, almost as a negotiation. You don't get a year to prepare your brief, as if you're going to court. You know, you've got to deal with things as they are raised. So you just don't know how you would have reacted. So, but I think that I think Fabian would agree with this. Happy as he is about having achieved this for Gibraltar, probably he cannot tell you whether, with a different group of people around the table, there might have been this or that might have been done better, or this or that might not have come out as well as it came out in the end for Gibraltar. You just have to take the view that a negotiation is a matter of give and take, that necessarily the outcome of a responsible negotiation involves agreeing to things that you would much have preferred not to have had to agree to, and judge whether, on balance, the result is better for the people that you're representing than had you walked away from the negotiating table, refused to do the deal, and brought about the alternative, which in our case would have been a hard border, and people need to understand what the economic consequences of that might have been.
Can I just say that I think what I have had, which you would have had too if you had been involved in leading the negotiation, is an asset that we cannot undervalue, and that is Michael Llamas. Having spent 30 years inside the European institutions and understanding European law inside out, Joseph and I had in Michael somebody who could think like the Europeans were going to think. Because I think part of the importance of the success of this negotiation has been that we might know the Brits and we might know the Spanish, and we might have all for 3 centuries been observing each other and know what the issues are. But the hard stops in this negotiation were very often the Commission, because the Commission is the guardian of the treaties, and the treaties cannot be moulded just how Spain wants them or how the United Kingdom might want to mould them, because there's 26 other member states who will not allow the remoulding of the treaties in a particular way. And having Michael there, who understood the language of the Commission and understood the thinking of the Commission, I think enabled us to triangulate things in a way that would have enabled Peter, if he were negotiating, and enabled me and Joseph, as we were negotiating, to achieve results that did not cross Commission red lines. And that was always going to be key.
And he missed the critical moment at the end. Have you spoken to him? Is he gutted? Or?
I have spoken to him.
He is gutted.
Yeah. I have spoken to him. I think he's particularly gutted given that where he was did not come out as we all expected, i.e. England lost.
Yeah, because he's in the States because of his FIFA role.
Talking about a point that Sir Peter made, that you wouldn't know if anything else would have happened had a different situation come into play. the opposition's assertion that, in all fairness, without them having been privy to the negotiations, what you said today, that to remain in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was the wrong decision. How can you be so sure?
Well, you can be very sure. Because, look, that's actually a black and white. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement is the agreement the United Kingdom does to give effect to Brexit. Brexit is about putting up barriers to trade so that you can have your own rules for goods, and barriers to immigration so that you want to stop people who are in Schengen coming to the United Kingdom. You want to stop people who are even in the EU coming into the United Kingdom. So it was always very clear to us that we wanted the negative image of the TCA. We wanted the fluidity of goods and the fluidity of people. That we understood from the first moment. So being excluded from the TCA was de rigueur to achieve what we ended up agreeing. Would we all have liked to have had, instead of a New Year's Eve framework agreement announced at the time of the TCA, this treaty published at the same time as the TCA? Of course we would all have liked that, but it would have been impossible. There wasn't the bandwidth in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, which has one of the best functioning civil services in the world, and the European Commission, which is a smaller civil service, by the way, the European Commission is not big in numbers to negotiate this, would not have been able to give the bandwidth to deliver this treaty at the same time as they were delivering the TCA. That was just not possible.
Do you agree that...
Well, I think you just have to look at the results of the Brexit referendums in Gibraltar and in the UK. We want the opposite to the UK. We voted to stay in by 98% or 90%, and they voted out by 50%. They wanted to leave the very things that we have done this agreement to get. Yeah. And that's the inescapable reality. And in a sense, it's, I think, admirable that the UK government has invested the effort that it has invested, because doing this treaty for Gibraltar has not been without political risk, certainly for the previous Conservative government, not so much for this government, Labour government, that has wanted to get closer to Europe. And in fact, the existence of this negotiation...
Will actually might help them.
Yes, and it allowed them to demonstrate that in the flesh. But for the previous Conservative government on whose watch all this started, this was threatening, given that the negotiations that had taken place about Northern Ireland and the view that they'd taken place.
Opposite direction of travel.
Exactly.
And in particular, when we had a really exceptional operator who helped us a lot in the context of the negotiation, but who happened to be the man at one point most hated in Brussels, I think even more than Boris Johnson, that is to say David Cameron, because he brought about the result. But look, Cameron is a very able operator. He has rebuilt those relationships, and he was very useful in the context of the negotiation because he's got a great mind. And he was
had so many people involved in the negotiations. You have to think, OK, of course.
Yeah. There's a very interesting, as an aside, there was a very interesting exchange in the House of Commons today in a debate where Andrew Rosindell, who was a Conservative at the time of the TCA, and now is for reform, was saying that Gibraltar had been left high and dry by not being included in the TCA. And he was reminded by Mr. Doughty, by Stephen Doughty, the Europe Minister, that he had formed part of that government. But he also went further, Stephen Doughty, and I've just got it here on my screen. Let me just read it to get it exactly. He was saying, he reminded Mr. Rosendale that the negotiation for our treaty had been done in partnership with the Gibraltar government throughout. And he was saying that it had been voted unanimously. The motion calling on the UK government to enter the treaty had been voted unanimously in the Gibraltar Parliament. And he said this: it is not for him, meaning Rosendale, it is not for him to stand up in this House and tell Gibraltarians what to think. And that was quite, I thought that was quite significant.
Absolutely right. And I think that's the value of the unanimous motion, which, as I told the House at the time, I thought was all of us who were parliamentarians at this time putting aside our what we might all call our petty day-to-day issues and thinking about the value of this for future generations of Gibraltarians, and being able to say in the House of Commons, when ratification arguments come, etc., this is the unanimously expressed
We have heard it in every debate.
Of the people of Gibraltar through their parliament, I think is hugely valuable, and I credit the leader of the GSD for having taken the view that that was important and for having voted with the government on that.
There have been plenty of workarounds to ensure the agreement's success. Has sovereignty, in the true sense of the word, been truly protected or slightly moulded for economic benefits? I know that Sir Peter gave a legal opinion on sovereignty in the treaty. But could we have perhaps tweaked it a bit? Or?
I don't think so. I think that it was fundamental that we should protect the sovereignty with an express clause in the agreement. I've said now until I'm blue in the face that there's 1,018 pages. There's one clause that deals with the sovereignty, and there we park everything and we do everything else. It might have been a little different if the treaty were about things that directly touch and concern sovereignty. But the treaty is about free movement of goods and the fluidity of people. And I don't think anybody in Gibraltar has ever accepted the ideas that led to Brexit. I mean, that Bill Cash used to put so unfortunately eloquently, and he believed so passionately in, although he also loves Gibraltar, that if you are accepting different standards for your goods which are being set in Brussels, this is somehow a diminution of your sovereignty. If you're accepting
European Court of Justice, I mean, he was very...
So the view that has always been taken in Gibraltar throughout our membership of the European Union, which led us, who are such great defenders of our sovereignty, to say 96% we want to stay in, is that actually if you are pooling your ability to do things in terms of setting standards and in terms of determining who comes and who goes, in a way that enables you to come out when you want, then you haven't surrendered your sovereignty. You've made the sovereign decision to do this in this way for now. And in the future, if it doesn't go your way, to pull out. That's your sovereign ability.
So, Peter, you gave a legal opinion, but a legal opinion is not a political opinion, of course.
I wouldn't distinguish between the two.
How can you hold a
I think on this
view?
subject it is. I think on this subject it is. I think both politically and in law, if this treaty made concessions or had any adverse impact on sovereignty properly understood, as a legal concept, I would not have supported it, and I would not be sitting here tonight being pleasant to Fabian. I mean, he would not be here either, because I suspect he wouldn't have done the treaty either in those circumstances.
There's been a real bromance going on here.
On the question of the political aspect of sovereignty. Look, I think I said before, when the text was published, there are things in there that we won't like to see. That doesn't mean that they breach our sovereignty. That we simply don't like them because of the history of our relationship and because of the existence of the sovereignty claim. But it doesn't mean that they violate our sovereignty. Spain has not visibly... She is doing things. I mean, Reyes is a Spanish man sitting behind the booth, signing passport, but they're not doing it on behalf of the Spanish state. So this is not a gain for Spain. This is Spain on behalf of the EU, not on behalf of us, carrying out certain
That's
functions.
the difficulty. It's the gap between the legal reality and the visible.
Yes, because politics means what people like and what people don't like. It doesn't mean the legal concepts of sovereignty. If this treaty was sovereignty sensitive and sovereignty relevant, I think Spain would have more to worry about than we would in that sense. And indeed, the Spanish government has come under, in my view, equally unjustified criticism for having effectively given up on the sovereignty claim. This is how it's been seen by the right wing in Spain.
What has Spain given up? I was asked that by a journalist the other day. What has Spain lost?
Well, in a nutshell, well, perhaps Fabian, better placed for me than answer that.
Well, I mean, I think we've got to be loyal to this process, and we have to protect our negotiating partners here. Right, so Article 2 is specifically designed so that we can all say none of us have given up anything, right? And
or advanced.
Or advanced. And therefore, it is not offensive for me to listen to Pedro Sanchez or to José Manuel Álvarez say, we have not changed one comma of our claim, because that is what enables them to then do everything else. Right? Exactly. I think we must leave it at that, at least from the point of view of the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. I'm not going to say another word.
But do you think that is something that gets to people? I think people don't mind if the claim is parked, as long as you carry on.
No, I think the point that Fabian is making is that we've got to remember that things that we say here get reported in Spain, and you don't want to make life more difficult. You've got to allow your opposite numbers to have the political space to do good things with you.
They've got enough people on that side talking about the things that they say they've given up, and
Okay, so one of the things that they have gained is the demolition of the front. For them, that was a big thing, the physical demolition. El último muro, we keep hearing. We've seen visible manifestations of what's happening at the frontier. Behind the scenes, that raft of legislation that we've been seeing. We've got images actually of the frontier fence coming down, but so much behind the scenes. And I talk about the regulations that we've had enacted. These have to be enforced and complied with. I've asked this question before, but can we do it?
Of course we can.
You said earlier we had to be very careful not to make any mistakes with the treaty. There's a lot to do.
But look, a lot of what you're seeing in the TGEU regulations that are being published is to a very great extent catch up on issues relating to the EU, or they are issues where we haven't had regulations in a particular area because when we were members of the EU, we weren't in Schengen and we weren't in the goods chapter. So that has to come in. But regulating that is now done to a very great extent. Policing that is something that is done in slightly slower order. I mean, you haven't got to be checking all the goods on the market on the first day. We also have a lot of transitional periods which will apply. Although the law had to be in place by the 15th, there are transitional periods that are relevant. So I have no doubt that we have the infrastructure in government to be able to deal with those issues in a way that is not going to find us wanting in any way. Look, the United Kingdom would not have signed up to the treaty if it did not have from us confirmation that we were doing all the things before the treaty could be sort of pressed play on, which were required to be done by the time it had to be done. Those checklists have been done before Michael was allowed to go off to deal with his other responsibilities, confirmed by the United Kingdom in the normal way that the United Kingdom does before it enters into any treaty and says, go.
Brian, as a journalist, how difficult do you think it'll be to adapt to before we let the politicians in, how difficult will it be to adapt to a post-treaty... Well, once a politician or is a politician?
Politician and former politician.
Yeah. How difficult will it be to adapt to a post-treaty Gibraltar? There have been issues that have been put down to teething issues. The taxi drivers showing discontent after a Spanish taxi drove into Gibraltar. Real confusion at the commercial gate and problems at the airport with the EES. This was described to me as total chaos with people doing
and to
up
me,
to 12.
in those exact words. I mean, let's start with the EES. It's day 2, first thing. And also, I think that the EES has had rollout problems everywhere.
The chaos with the EES is almost welcome to Europe, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so it's, I mean, that, I suppose that you'll have to work at it. I think that there was an issue with programming the machines or something.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if that's resolved or not. Perhaps you can tell us now. But I think that, I mean, that's one friction point that needs to be resolved because we get daily arrivals and so on. The taxi driver issue, I don't think that should be overplayed because I think it's just misinformation misunderstanding on their side, frankly, because there's a lot of detail in that treaty. But it was clear. I think you've said it in Parliament, you've said it on TV, and there's nothing about taxis in the treaty. Or explicitly allowing them to come in. I mean, nothing has changed with the taxi drivers, as I understand it.
Look, that's right, but I think we have to respect the fact that some bloke in Aladdin might not be following it with the level of understanding that we are.
But exactly.
And we have to inform.
And I personally don't see the issue with a taxi coming in and dropping off a passenger. I mean, I don't know if that has been looked at or not, but maybe there's a reason for that. But I think that there's a lot more stuff and a lot more problems to come, whether we like it or whether we don't, because this is not going to be easy to implement across its whole the whole broad range of things that it deals with. And I suspect that one of the biggest friction points will be when we start talking about joint patrols in the waters and that kind of issue. I don't know how you're going to deal with, because the waters, obviously, there are different legal
we'll resolve that.
legal views on it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll come to that. But, I mean, I think it's very important that we understand that the level of detail with which we look at things is not necessarily the level of details with which it's been looked at elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And we have an obligation to communicate the things that matter to us. I think one of the things that we failed to do yesterday in the euphoria of removing the gates is put a very clear sign, a traffic sign at the frontier, which we must do, and it's already being commissioned, that says no taxis, no servicio público, no Uber, no Bolt. So that the guy who's coming, who may in all innocence just have been told that the frontier is now down, and a client says to him, "Ay, llévame a Punta Europa en Gibraltar," knows that he can't do that. So John Cortés is writing to all of the mayors in the region, to the Junta de Andalucía, and to all of the regional authorities, setting out this part of the treaty just in a friendly way, reminding that this is the way that it works. We'll be writing to all the taxi companies, we'll be writing to Bolt and to Uber, telling them that they cannot program this. To an extent, the teething problems are when you say, oh, okay, we know that we've agreed the right thing, but we haven't done enough to make sure that people do not make this sort of mistake.
So you need a communication campaign, basically.
I think that's right. And we can't expect necessarily that this will be interesting to the Spanish government to do. So if we want to ensure that people know this through our public channels and directly, we need to be doing this communication. At the airport, the issues that we have had are twofold. We are having the issues that all of Europe is having with the EES, in particular because our Spanish colleagues did not have enough of the EES machines. There are more EES machines coming. They will be set up, as I understand it, by Sunday. We've had another problem.
We've had 3 machines, is that right? That's what I was told.
We've had 3 machines on entry and I think only 1 machine on exit, but there are more machines coming, so I think every place will have 5 machines at least.
These are the registration ones.
These are the EES machines. Yeah. And then after that you've got the E-gate. Then after that you've got the E-gate. And the problems that we had with the E-gate relate to an inability by the subcontractor of the Spanish government to confirm the use of the Gibraltar civilian registration card and the ID card. That is now confirmed. We're waiting for the update to be done. We expect it will be done during the weekend or very early next week. In the interim, we have reached an arrangement which will put Gibraltar residents at the front of the queue. But to do that, we need to slightly rearrange the way that you get to first the BCA and then the Schengen check. That will be 72 or 96 hours. Look, I think we're not in a bad place if those are the only teething problems that we have. And then Gibraltar becomes, as I think it will become, Joshua Hassan Gibraltar International Airport will become one of the easiest places to access the European Union through once these machines are working, both for Gibraltar residents and for third country nationals.
They refuse to call it after.
Your airport.
I've told you why not.
I would like to address this issue in a slightly different way, if you don't mind my saying. Give me the chance to, because I don't think this is just about teething. Look, it would be churlish to pile in against, to criticize things that are genuine teething problems. This machine is not working, or that guard doesn't yet know how it works, or the genuine teething problems. But I think what we've just got to be frank and sincere about this. Even when the teething problems are over, implicit in these arrangements are that people, as I think you've hinted with respect to joint, but at the airport too, there are arrangements here that are going to result in us all seeing things that we will get used to, that other countries wouldn't blink an eyelid if they had to see it in their airports, but we, because of our history, are not going to enjoy seeing. We will get used to it as a Frenchman would be to see a Belgian in an airport. And we've just got to understand that this doesn't mean that there has been any sovereignty. We've got to be confident about this too. Take the E-gates, for example. Well, the treaty says that the Spanish, without a uniform, but identificado, which means one of these, what do you call them, fluorescent vests, that says Guardia Civil or something, even when the system is up and running, are going to have the power to police, if they want to, the, what's the word, the treaty, not police?
Oversee,
or sort of the E-gates. So we're going to have to get used to seeing, this is not the same as being checked, but we're going to have to get used to that. We're going to have to get used to the joint maritime patrols. We're going to have to get used, perhaps, to real or contrived exercise of the rights of hot pursuit. But, you know, when we've seen it 2 or 3 times, so long as it's not abused,
it's really... Sorry.
Please.
It's a really interesting word that you've used there, contrived hot pursuit, because we go back to the Bebe Vox thing again, that if there is a political a change of political landscape in Spain, there are a lot of practical aspects of this treaty that, even if it's with the EU, will be enforced by Spain on behalf of the EU.
Performed by.
Sorry, okay. And it's that political change and the performance of those tasks that could be a flashpoint because of contrived, as you referred to, just because
What
they
I
want to
meant
make a
by
point.
vigilance. I think that's part of
But that's why we're going to have so much investment in the resources that our law enforcement agents have there. So even if there is an attempt to come, we should be able to control that. But there might also be the opposite of what we're talking about. There might also be a genuine case of hot pursuit of a very nasty person coming in our direction, and we would want to be supporting Spanish law enforcement in apprehending people like that.
Hot pursuit and all these things are an intrinsic part, not of this deal,
of Schengen.
They're an intrinsic part of the whole Schengen acquis, and the idea that we could be allowed to plug into the Schengen acquis but be exempted from these things is for the birds. So we either take it or leave it. And we just got to, and I suppose this is my point, that we've just got to learn not to feel threatened by it.
But everybody...
And learn that our sovereignty is stronger than all of that.
And also remember, I think, because in this whole issue about the security debate, we often forget that actually one of the front lines of protection for us is Spanish law enforcement operating in the campo, especially in particular with issues like terrorism and
that it works both ways, and that we can have hot pursuit in the other direction.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And that there could be people here who might also wish to contrive that. I don't believe that anyone in our law enforcement agencies would do that. But look, we must also be alive to possibilities like that. And that's why I'm always very keen to talk about us being very careful, as I'm sure all of our officials and all our law enforcement agents will be, to ensure that we are scrupulous in the way that we discharge our obligations under the treaty. We don't just owe that obligation to ourselves, we also owe it to the United Kingdom. And I can tell you, there have been a lot of officials who, despite us raising a glass on the 14th to the 15th and celebrating that moment, who have been on all the time at the airport and in all of these areas to ensure that even if there is a difficulty, the chaos doesn't quite get to the chaos that we've seen in other places. I mean, we're talking about queues of 4-5 hours at Dover and at other European airports. It hasn't come to that here.
Let me ask you something about, if I may, about the technical notice that you issued today, because a lot of people were under the impression that as a result of the treaty, they would be able to fly from the UK to Malaga, for example, and go to the EU queue rather than the non-EU queue, but that's not the case.
Not yet, is the answer. Really? So one of the things that we expect will happen is that as part of the rollout of this process, the European Commission and the United Kingdom, together with the government of Gibraltar, will be talking bilaterally to all the other states in Schengen as well, that they will be given guidance by the European Commission about Gibraltarians being able to go into those queues, but that period, that will take an element of time. We've had reports of both things. We've already had reports of people saying, magnificent, I was in Lithuania, and I went to the EU queue, and they took me, they knew all about the deal, and they recognized my ID card. You might have a report of something different. We're not able yet to say to people with confidence, this is what you can do. We are saying confidently, this is what you will be able to do. And I just sort of gently remind people, we are at provisional application stage.
Exactly.
We're not yet at ratification.
After ratification, you could even go into the Schengen handbook.
That's right, exactly. As a footnote in the Schengen handbook, which is what we expect. But what matters in terms of provisional application is the Gibraltar-La Linea frontier. That's where the 15,000 people a day, where all of us wanting to go. I mean, I get the statistics. There are some Monday mornings, when the crossings are 48,000 crossings.
But today, it must have been anecdotal. Today,
but the point is this, provisional application matters here, right? It doesn't matter if there's one Gibraltar resident who's flying into a Hungarian airport from outside the Schengen area. Right? That is not something that in the context of the EU is something to worry about. The Gibraltarian might be very disappointed that he's got to have to queue with third country nationals if they don't take him in the normal queue. But provisional application matters here. Once we're at ratification, we will expect to have had the time to explain this throughout the EU and with the help of the Commission and the United Kingdom.
Let's talk about ratification after a short break, and we'll also talk about that concordat that was signed in Brussels between Gibraltar and the UK. We're back in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Viewpoint, and we're going to start talking about the Concordat, whether the politicians like it or the President and former politicians like it or not. But before we go on to that, let's take some questions from the public. Chief Minister, one for you. It seems on social media many people feel strongly a referendum on the treaty should have been offered. Does the CM feel he has a mandate from the people without one?
Well, look, I obviously think that we have a mandate from the people to do this, in particular, given that there is unanimity in Parliament on the subject. We went to a general election to talk about the issues in Brexit. We talked about being 99.9% of the way there, and we didn't say that we were going to put this to a referendum. Look, if I may say so, referenda have their place in politics. They're hugely important tools. Peter deployed a referendum very effectively when we needed to in the context of protection of our sovereignty in 2002, 2003. I believe it was right to put an issue like reproductive rights to a referendum in Gibraltar. But this is a question of how we bring about agility of movement of people, which we need economically, and agility of movement of goods. None of this touches and concerns sovereignty in any way whatsoever. And so therefore, I'm very confident that it was right that we should do this without going to a referendum. The referendum on Brexit is what got us into
the mess in the first place.
And this is a complex issue. You know, the referendum on abortion was about one section in our law. This is 1,018 pages. It's very easy to make mischief about a treaty like this without people being able to have the time to go through it themselves, understand it for themselves, and make a decision, a properly informed decision for themselves and their families. That's what they pay us to do.
I'm sorry, Chief Minister, it's another one for you, but what has been agreed with regard to the provision of health care for the Gibraltarian elderly?
So the E111 issue, which is, I assume, what is being referred to there, is not resolved by the treaty because the European Union did not want to have this resolved by the treaty. This comes a little bit back to the argument I've been having with current GSD members about the right of establishment. The EU did not want to do the right of establishment with us, and we did not want to do the right of establishment with them, because in the end, we would be opening our territory for them to have the right to reside here. That's 480 million people. And in the context of healthcare, what the 480 million are saying is, look, in E111 for a territory this small is very complicated and requires a specific strand of reconciliation for Gibraltar. We're not interested in that. By all means, go and do a deal with Spain on this bilaterally. That's not unattractive to us, and it's not unattractive to Spain. And there are certain things that we will be kicking off now. We'll start talking about them now. We may not be able to finalise them until there is ratification, but it's not impossible that we might do a bilateral arrangement with Andalusia or with Spain on E111 issues. But Nigel Feetham has resolved this for most people with the captive that he's created for this purpose.
Spain actively and undemocratically claims sovereignty of our land. We've always had stick from her. Are we getting the carrot now? Perhaps you'd like to reply to that one.
I don't think there's on sovereignty, I don't think there's a carrot or a stick. As we've said in the first part of this programme, sovereignty remains where it was, unaffected. Our defence remains unaffected. Their claim remains unaffected. The reason why I've supported this treaty is because I think Gibraltar's future requires something like this to ensure that our socioeconomic prosperity, sorry to use a complicated phrase, that our economy in the future is able to sustain the standard of living for our children and our grandchildren that we have been enjoying until now. That is why we're doing this treaty. If you want to talk about carrots, that is the carrot that caused me to hold my nose, which is how I describe the things that I know I'm going to be seeing and I'm not going to enjoy. But the alternative is to stay shut up in a Gibraltar with a hard border, watching the quality of our lives deteriorated, watching our leading companies suffer. Who knows if the gaming industry would have been sustainable in Gibraltar with the lack of housing that we have for their labourers? Probably not. Watching our economic prospects dwindle at the cost of the ability of government in the future to pay for the things that governments have been paying for in the past for all of my children and for the children of most people that are now adults. We could have made a case for the fact that the present generation of adult Gibraltarians would have been more comfortable and less threatened and less challenged and less worried by having done nothing. But would that have been a responsible approach to citizenship? Or should we not decide to bite the bullet a little bit now in order to have better prospects for our future? That is what's motivated me to take whatever element of I don't like in this treaty and nevertheless support it.
There are a couple of questions on security and one asking, so that somebody actually is saying that they were humiliated by the scenes after the football with the Spanish flags, and somebody asking, so talking about security, will the Chief Minister be able to guarantee that Gibraltar will be a safe place to live? And also asking, what would happen if illegal immigrants by sea, if we got them, who would be responsible for them? So I think that's a bit about the separation between the UK and Gibraltar.
So that's a lot of questions. First of all, I think that we all felt that the combination of the football on the Tuesday night and this event was a little unfortunate, but with tact and good humour, I think my fellow Gibraltarian citizens who were at the frontier turned the whole thing into a very positive embracing of those who were coming over. Remember that
the majority of people from La Linea were in that mood too.
Exactly, and
we see Viva los Llanitos were Spanish flags.
Absolutely, and we see the Spanish flag as this representation of the claim on sovereignty. Look, a Spaniard doesn't see the Spanish flag in that way. A Spaniard watching a football match where Spain is playing sees it in a slightly different way and may not realise that we might see the flag as something quite so threatening. But it worked out in the end. It worked out very well. I think on security, we've already spoken to how we're making Gibraltar a digital fortress, and Gibraltarians have no civil libertarian reaction to that because we all want to feel the safety and security that we will now have from Gibraltar as a digital fortress. I just want to make one more comment, which I think I failed to make earlier, that actually if this did go to a referendum, with both sides of the House supporting it, and with every single former Chief Minister supporting it, I fancy my chances of getting the results starting with a 9 again.
Boaty McBoatface was the start of the referendum.
The answer to the question on who arrests or who takes possession of an illegal immigrant, the answer is if it's in our waters, us, and if it's in their waters, them.
That's right. That's provided for specifically.
Yeah.
OK, so lucky day. We're going to talk about that concordat between the UK and Gibraltar signed in Brussels. This is a guarantee for the ROC that we'll be able to pull out and we'll have to agree to the UK pulling out. How much comfort can we take from it when it's a political and not a legally binding document? And you were pushing for the concordat.
There is only political assurance in these things. As I explained the day before yesterday on the extended Newswatch programme, there is no such thing as an irremovable legal guarantee. The UK is operating in this context that this is an international treaty to which it is a party. It cannot, as a matter of its own constitutional framework, abrogate to Gibraltar its freedom of actions as the contracting party. Even if it enshrined it in a law, it would not give us the guarantee that some people think that a legal guarantee would give us, because laws can be repealed. There is no such thing as a law that cannot be repealed. And therefore, just like the preamble to the Constitution on our sovereignty, these are political commitments given by the government of the day in the case of the preamble, given by the government of the day in the United Kingdom now in relation to these issues. And we're better off with a political commitment than with a legal commitment, because a legal commitment is more easily changed by simply changing the law, which the UK Parliament could always do. A political commitment is a matter of moral inheritance, a moral baton passed by one British government to the next, and frankly, if the reliability of the trust that we can place in a British government depended, and I don't think it does, on the difference between whether it's in a law or in a political document, frankly, we are safe under neither, but we are safer under the political commitment, as the preamble to the Constitution has demonstrated. Could the Concordat have said more? It could have. Could the Concordat, if written in Gibraltar and signed blindly by the UK, have been even more reassuring to us? Yes. Is it enough to tick the box that I was calling for back then? I think it is, even though strictly speaking the Concordat itself is not what the resolution of the House called for. That is a maximalist position. I think this is enough. I settle for this.
What more could it have said?
Sorry, can I come in there?
Yes.
Because I think that the point that has to be made is that with the letter, the Concordat is what the House called for. I think that's important. Now, let's look at the history of the Concordat.
Subject to the exceptions.
Yes.
Subject to the
exceptions, which
exceptionalism, yes.
Which we have to understand for all of the reasons that you've expressed. But let's look at the history of the Concordat. How does the Concordat come about? Look, the Concordat comes about because before Brexit, Joseph and I were in Brussels and we were talking to the SNP about the Concordat that they had with the United Kingdom, which was the equivalent for them of our Section 47.3 of the Constitution. Our Section 47.3 says if something happens when we were members of the European Union, which relates to the things that Gibraltar ministers are responsible for, then the fact that it happens in the EU doesn't mean that the UK becomes responsible for it, because it happens in international law and in external relations. The Scottish actually had set that out in a very good concordat with the UK, and we were looking to develop Section 47.3 into a concordat in membership of the European Union. Then Brexit happens, and we have the withdrawal agreement. And of course, the way to regulate between us and the United Kingdom what was happening was to then go back to the concept of the Concordat and regulate the powers and duties under the withdrawal agreement, where they split between the UK and Gibraltar in a Concordat. And for that reason, as we were looking at the treaty, we were noting what had to go into the new Concordat under the treaty. I think we achieved what we needed to achieve, because at the end of the day, what we are dealing with, as Peter says, is in effect a political assurance. And that political assurance could be expressed in a slightly different way. Indeed, the Concordat may change, and it may get better, because things are now being done very quickly to achieve signing before the 15th of July. We now have more time to talk to the United Kingdom about potentially synthesizing the letter and the Concordat into just one document. We can do that, but in the end, what has got us where we've got to, and what is going to ensure that we stay safe, is the ability of the government of Gibraltar to always ensure that it keeps the United Kingdom on side. And it does that in various ways. And on the treaty, I come back to this point, which I cannot say enough until I'm hoarse, that we have to protect the obligations that we have acquired under the treaty, and we must always deliver on them. That is what will build the United Kingdom's trust, that we are not ever going to put them in breach of their international legal obligations, which, in the history of the United Kingdom and in the history of international law, the United Kingdom has been the staunchest defender of internationally, except for that period of aberration when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister.
The best way to... Sorry,
there's another factor as well, because it's a very legalistic conversation that we're having for obvious reasons, and political, as you're describing. No? But it's also about the context that all of this is happening in, and the way that the relationship with the UK government has evolved since your days, since the joint sovereignty period, the Constitution, the double lock, the relationship that we have with MPs across cross-party, both sides of the Parliament and all the different groups. And that is about constant engagement with them. It's about the way that the ministers have constantly briefed MPs and ministers. It's about the work that Dominic Searle carried out, that Jonathan Scott is now carrying out, that Taidwarda Jib House carries out, and it's that constant engagement and them understanding our issues in a way that perhaps in the past they didn't.
That's fair. If I can say something which is not meant to be partisan, but it is not an accident that I have been able to meet every single Prime Minister since I became Chief Minister. That's hard work and ensuring that the United Kingdom understands at the highest level what the Gibraltar issues are. That's worth much more than a concordat when the chips are down. But the concordat is very important in this context.
The value of a concordat, for which read, instead of a silly word that no one ever uses in their language, for which read assurance from the British government, is that Gibraltar will never find itself trapped in this arrangement if we collectively decide that it is not in our interests for whatever number of reasons, because it doesn't work the way we are.
But don't we have the commitment?
I don't see that as the value. Well, I'll tell you why. Because
I just finished the point, Fabian, and it allows reassurance to be given to the people in Gibraltar today watching us who have misgivings about it, who have anxieties about it, and who have concerns about how much you're... The way to reassure those people most easily is to say, we're not stuck in this. If it really is what you fear, we can make the decision.
Why wouldn't the double lock not have protected us already?
Well, I think it would have. And you're absolutely right that the Concordat does all the things that you've said, and it is the balm that we can put on our concern for the moment. But for me, the value of the Concordat is actually the opposite. In other words, that we can, if we want, continue to be locked into this arrangement, which I do not think we should consider a golden cage.
Because that's the veto or the trigger.
Because the bigger problem that we have looming, and it's possible that Monday may change all that, and that Andy Burnham may once again bring back Labour to popularity, as Kimi Badenoch seems to be bringing back the Conservatives. There is nothing better for Gibraltar, in my view, than a strong British government of either a Labour or Conservative bent. But you could have a hung parliament, or you could have a reform government. And a reform government could say some of the things that we've heard some reform people say today in the Westminster debate, and they could make a decision over the heads of the people of Gibraltar to pull Gibraltar out of a treaty when every Gibraltarian might be very happy with how it's going. And so the Concordat, for me, has the value of also stopping them, insofar as it is politically effective, from being able to press a button where the Gibraltar Parliament or the people of Gibraltar take the opposite view that we want to continue.
But in terms of taking the Gibraltarians today who have anxieties and concerns.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's the other half.
Yeah.
But they're both equally valuable. I agree. This is the trigger for us to choose to get out, and the veto to prevent the UK from getting us out against our wishes.
Exactly.
Both are equally valuable. Absolutely.
With the UK government in flux, as you mentioned, how can we take comfort from a personal letter when that person might not be in government?
Well, because it's not a personal letter. It's on the letterhead of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office addressed to the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. It's an institutional communication. It is the position of the UK government, and that letter is as valuable as the Concordat. In other words, the UK government that does not want to keep to the Concordat can undo it. And to an extent, undoing the point I was making before, because if you had a reform government, they could just as easily rip up the letter, rip up the Concordat, and do what they liked.
Or the law, if it was in it.
But that's putting more obstacles in their way. And I think that's the key, that there are political commitments contained there. Yeah. Reform contains people who say that they stand by the overseas territories, that they support the overseas territories, that they defend the right of self-determination of the overseas territories. It would be very strange indeed to defend our self-determination as an overseas territory by doing the opposite of what we think is right for us.
And the exceptional circumstances, that's obviously a phrase.
Well, this is a phrase which is hugely important. We've taken advice from lawyers who have expertise in international laws of treaties, Geoffrey Jowl in particular, who's very well known for this, about what that phrase means in international law, and it really does mean the gravest potential circumstances of the United Kingdom making decisions in time of war, the type of moment when laws might be suspended and freedoms might not apply in the way that we might wish. So I'm very confident that that is exceptional in the normal meaning of the word, and not the sort of thing that could be got away with in normal time.
You agree with that?
Well, look, It's all down to the question of trust. I think Doughty, to his credit, has gone in the letter quite a long way in giving us reassurance of what exceptional means, would need to be to mean, and does not mean. Does it still leave room for a mischievous British government in the future to wriggle and duck and dive and frustrate Gibraltar's wishes at all cost? Well, if that's the case, the whole Concordat is valueless.
And the double lock means nothing.
And the double lock with it.
Yeah.
This is why I keep on saying this is about trust. Do we trust in a British system of governance and a British political morality that says it, that when a British government of the day makes a political commitment to the people of an overseas territory, that is inherited and respected by successor governments without legal obligation, not because the law requires them to do it, not because they're not free to abandon it if they want to, but because that is the way the British system works.
And
it's always been so in the past.
Well, and the example I think you can give to that, Peter, is the first preamble that we had, which they've maintained for now over 50 years, 60 years, the double lock, which was political and we have built on. And now the Concordat and the nothing about you without you. I think that's important, but it's not just the Doughty letter. Remember what was said in the House of Commons also matters, and in the House of Lords. And Ray Collins went even further in the House of Lords and said, we would only ever act in keeping with the views of the people of Gibraltar on these matters, and this is the direct quote, because I don't know that I expressed those words exactly as he expressed them, and he said, and we will stick rigidly to that. That is the position of the UK government. It's now in Hansard, in the Lords, it's in Hansard, in the Commons, and it's in the letter, and it's in the Concordat.
I repeat what I said 25 minutes ago. As of speaking frankly, I trust more a political commitment than if it were enshrined in a law. If it were enshrined in a law, all it takes is a majority in Parliament to overturn it. There is no tradition of governments feeling bound by laws passed by a previous government, but there is a tradition in British politics of respecting political commitments made to smaller people for whom you're responsible.
And that's why it's vital that all MPs understand what we want and what we're about and what the issues are, rather than express them.
And as you know, so often people sometimes say, when we bring people over for National Day, but that's not it. That's not it. It's people who actually are taking the time to understand us, who then get up and defend us when the chips are down across all political parties, and that's got huge value. And
that's
I think all governments of Gibraltar have done it in a way, and it becomes increasingly sophisticated because in the Commons it's also harder to pay for people's flights and all the rest of it, rightly so. So there's even more commitment in the people who are coming now.
Let's talk about
the Commons today. There was a lot of the points that we're making now. A lot of MPs were reflecting that in the same language. I mean, there was literally just one or two notes of dissonance.
Let's talk about practical implementation. We've spoken of the work that's brought us to this point. You've spoken about bringing people over for National Day. Is that what happens next? Lobbying before ratification at the EU and UK level?
Well, I think that there are, as you've just indicated in the latter part of your question, there are various strands to this. The United Kingdom, I think we've done the work so that ratification is going to be there, not least because the two principal parties, I think, are behind us. The Labour Party has a huge majority of 400, so ratification in the UK Parliament, never take anything for granted, but I think is well on track. Remember that in the UK system, we all talk about the CRAG, which is the 21 sitting days that this has to be laid. That's not ratification. In the end, it's the signature on behalf of His Majesty that amounts to ratification. The 21 sitting days is the process for potential debate and consideration by the Commons on the subject. And then in the EU, you've got the process in the European Parliament. I think that's going to require an element of work. I'm quite confident that we're going to get there. This is an act that the Commission has approved. A Commissioner has led on it, has given us a lot of time. The Council has approved it. So my view is that this will get over the line, but we might get some turbulence in the European part of the debate. And Gibraltar, even though it doesn't need to, must want to be part of that process of persuading in Brussels with the United Kingdom that this is an important part of the reset between the UK and the EU, and that Gibraltar is going to be a loyal partner of the European Union in this agreement, discharging the obligations that there will be. I can imagine that we're going to have turbulence on issues of the environment, there's going to be mischief making on the environment, etc., etc. It's also an opportunity to come and tell our story.
That's what you were saying as well, that there will still be problems afterwards. What is the Gibraltar Joint Implementation Council? Is it the same as the Cooperation Council with the specialised committees? And
So, no, it isn't. It has its own functions under the treaty, and it is designed to ensure that all of the obligations are set in track in the way that is necessary. So that's why when we started this process, I talked about the United Kingdom and Gibraltar doing a checklist of the things that we needed to know that we had done before we could confidently say, we go on the 15th of July.
when will all this start? When will the council stop meeting, these specialised committees?
Well, give us a chance. We're still trying to do the regulations.
Getting your feet under your desk.
And make sure that that the gates work, etc., etc.
Is there an economic impact study? Do we know at all what...
We do.
You said you were going to publish it.
Well, but we haven't ratified yet. Remember that we did something which we called the heat maps. And that was the study that we were doing to see what the effect of a hard Brexit would be in the context of Gibraltar and what the alternative was. And so you've got various pictures here. You've got the picture that you had when you were members of the European Union. You know what happens economically there if you're in the EU, but you haven't got Schengen and you haven't got free movement of goods. You know what happens if you have a hard border, and the heat maps tell you just how bad it gets. And then you have the work that tells you what happens in the context of being out of the EU, but in for goods and Schengen. And that economic analysis, which is the one that has led us to be able to understand what we needed to protect in the context of this treaty.
I'm sorry, but the questions are for the Chief Minister. Where are we on enhanced use of the airport? Has there been interest from new carriers?
There has been, and interestingly, a lot of that excitement is now coming initially not just from Spain, but from beyond Spain. I don't think that we will see much until the autumn round. I don't think you're going to see new flights in the summer schedule because the airlines are already flying the summer schedule. I think you might see something in the winter schedule, which might go through the year. That might be more Spain. And I think you'll see something in the next summer schedule, which will be beyond Spain towards Northern Europe, the use of Gibraltar Airport as a new hub for southern Iberia.
And interest has been expressed already on these?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, we had one particular airline that expressed the interest halfway through the negotiation and started selling tickets from Bilbao to Gibraltar, which would have been very welcome indeed, but they were not quite allowed to proceed.
What issues do you envisage at the frontier when you're reliant on Spain having to do their work? You did say you were having regular meetings with Juan Franco.
Well, the meetings with Juan Franco are about a slightly different issue. That's about looking forward to see what it is that we want to do and how we want to recast the relationship between the two cities. So, talking about the taxi issue, one of the things that we wanted to do, because of taxis not being able to cross in the way that we've discussed, is to create a central area between Gibraltar and La Linea where the Gibraltar taxi could bring you, leave you, and you would take the Spanish taxi, so that you could have the service of calling in Gibraltar for a taxi and saying, I would like to go to any particular destination in Algeciras. And the Gibraltar taxi would pick you up at your home, it would take you to the frontier, to the interchange, and you would pick up the other taxi that would be expecting you there to take you to Algeciras. Ditto the buses. The municipal buses from La Linea should come to this area, more or less where the loop is or used to be. You should be able to get off the bus if it's raining under a cover and get onto the Gibraltar bus under a cover without getting wet or exceedingly exposed to the sun in the summer. All of those logistical things we have to do with the municipality that's next to us. And there's a lot to do with the national government of Spain as well.
There's another question on beautification. When do you expect beautification at the frontier?
Well, it's already a lot better, and the process now starts. We're expecting to start building the tri-service joint headquarters. I don't think we're going to take down the customs building until we've sorted out more of the area, the old customs building, to build the new facility that we want to build. Building the tourist office is something that will require us to talk to La Linea as well. Depending on who has the land. Some of the land is owned by La Linea, some will be owned by the national authorities. There's no point building a tourist office that's opening up to an area where they're not taking down the building. So you have to make sure they take down the building and you coordinate all that. We're going to have meetings the second week of August with Juan Franco and his team to start talking about the logistics of that, and we'll continue talking to the national authorities of Spain about the issues that are national competence of Spain.
Can I ask about that? Because when I spoke to Juan Franco, and he was a bit frustrated because he was saying that he was facing problems getting the necessary engagement that he felt he wanted and needed with the Spanish ministries, and that there were issues with the transfer of state land to the municipality to be able to coordinate that. No? So, I mean, do you sense that, or is it just early days?
Well, look, I sense it from Juan, who I have an excellent relationship with. He's a magnificent bloke. I see him very often. I talk to him very often, and I sense it from him. Look, I think it is fair to say that all of the people who have been involved in this process have had bandwidth issues. We've had bandwidth issues. And I think those in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Spain who are dealing with the Gibraltar issues, and in Spain everything goes through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs if it relates to Gibraltar, have had bandwidth issues because we've wanted them to deliver on this and they've wanted to deliver on this first. And now we start to look at the other bits. So I hope that starts to now become fleshed out in a more real way.
Because the problem, if it doesn't, is that you will have a sticky border still. I mean, we saw it's difficult now because obviously the fares set up. No? So that caused tailbacks today and so on. But if it's not properly managed and if the infrastructure isn't properly put in place, that you'll have a different type of queue, but
well, yes, but I think we are getting the engagement on that, and it will come. Perhaps not as quickly as Juan might have liked and I might have liked, but it's coming. And it's also about laying out traffic in a different way as it accesses Gibraltar, potentially an eastern access to Gibraltar as well as a western access to Gibraltar, not just with commercial traffic coming through the east. And there's opportunities also to divert pedestrian traffic, because one of the things that happens now for traffic coming into Gibraltar is that pedestrian traffic from Gibraltar out towards Spain crosses, and there are zebra crossings that cause delays there.
That's a great causer of...
Exactly. So shifting all the pedestrian traffic to what we might call the old customs area as it goes into Spain will be a key part of getting rid of a lot of those issues, and then creating a sort of circular pedestrian way into the airport if you're coming from Spain, or to the tunnel and straight out. I might even be persuaded to say the tunnel was a good idea as well.
Without getting too technical, though, your transport hub would require people to cross from the pedestrian customs area to the transport hub.
Well, it depends where it goes. If it goes in the area of the loop,
you had it in the plans.
Yeah, if it goes in the area of the loop, then you need to get the pedestrians somewhere else. But at the moment, that you're not looking to do anything pedestrian from there. You're looking at an interchange where people are getting onto another bus or getting onto another taxi. So they're taken there by a vehicle and they leave there with a vehicle.
Unless they want to walk in.
If they want to walk in, then they could start causing
there is a question, and I'm just going to bring it up because, and I know that we have discussed it. It says, Sir Peter, how does it feel to see that the airport, which was so heavily criticised in the past, has now proved to be fit for purpose, not only in relation to the treaty, but for all receptions, briefings, meetings, etc. Well, we've just had the Chief Minister saying even the tunnel was a good idea. So
look,
the bromance continues.
Look, a serious answer. We built the airport because we wanted to project a successful Gibraltar at our most important entry point. And it does that. People forget what the old airport was like. This is an airport that everyone that comes to Gibraltar admires, and it projects an image of a successful Gibraltar that reflects where we are economically and where we want to head economically. It was also, in part, designed up to the frontier fence to allow for the implementation of the then political Córdoba airport agreement. And therefore it was part of a vision for a future relationship with Spain. And it is in that context that it is now particularly satisfying to me to see that it has become useful in that sort of vision, because this treaty is the paradigm of that vision, which was going to be a political agreement. This is a treaty, EU, UK. This is much more enduring than the Córdoba agreement would have been. So it's very satisfying to see not just at the airport itself and its size and design. If Fabian speaks about lots of airlines showing an interest, that we need an airport of this size. The location has facilitated these arrangements that we're all now approving of. And therefore, it's to me, it is one of the visions that lay behind the building of the airport and the funding of it come to pass, come to reality. And the tunnel was always the airport, the tunnel, and the multi-storey car park in Devil's Tower Road were all part of the same vision of rechanneling the entry into Gibraltar through that way under the tunnel. And getting people to visitors to park their cars rather than drive them.
But can I just come in on that? Because it's fairly okay to say in a cartoonish way we are now supporting something within support. We always said it was always about priority. Our challenge was that the airport was receiving a huge amount of public money, whilst there were not a new mental health facility, whilst there were not new schools, etc., never the issue of the airport. In fact, the airport was designed for a different sort of agreement, because Cordoba was a different sort of agreement. What you've got today, whilst we build the new facilities, actually looks a lot like what Cordoba would have looked like. The temporary facilities are a lot like what Cordoba would have looked like. But the corridors were designed for a different type of traffic. Now we're going to have to provide for Schengen arrivals and international arrivals. Remember, Cordoba was about flights to Spain and potentially flights to Schengen in the future. But look, providentially, and this is why you end up building on each other's legacy, to use a big word. Providentially, we were able to see that this was something that we could make work as part of these arrangements. And in relation to the tunnel, look, I became a convert to the tunnel because the traffic, I hadn't appreciated when I was leader of the opposition or I was in GSLP, the things that you appreciate when you're on the bridge of the ship and you have a vision of what is going around all the time. And the tunnel became an essential part of how traffic needed to flow around Gibraltar. And Peter and Joe Holliday worked very closely with my administration as we went through the litigation, and we delivered that in the end together. It's worked. We've got to look forward now and see how we make more of the airport than was envisaged at the time. We're not envisaging a Spanish terminal, for example, which was envisaged potentially as part of Cordoba. An entrance from Spain was envisaged from Cordoba. Yes. That's not envisaged now. So I think in the round, what people get is the benefit of two different administrations delivering a piece of national infrastructure that is going to work in a way that might not even have been intended at the time it was designed. That's why it can't be named after him. It's got to be named after Sir Joshua.
If the Chief Minister wants to call it a score draw, I'm happy.
I think we're calling it a score draw. I think we are. Okay, so if we could just wrap this up. The treaty has been described as a legacy. How do you think it will be judged in 50 years' time? Is it a Maastricht moment?
I mean, that's a difficult question. I'm confident that it will work. I'm confident that we have the ability to implement everything that we need to do and meet those requirements. And I get the sense that despite the unease that a lot of people still have about it, there's wider optimism, frankly. I'll go back to Tuesday at midnight, and I was down there. I'm a reporter. That's what I do, right? And in a situation like that, you tend to try and find one or two voices that crystallise it, and I used them in a column. So I was talking to a chap. I jotted his name down, Juan Sanchez Cerdóñez. I'd never met him. He was a 70-year-old man with a bicycle, and I asked him why he was there, what it meant to him, and he said, "Look, my dad used to work here at Gibraltar, put food on the table," and then he started to describe. He tried to describe. Further what it meant to him, and he started crying, right? And he ended up literally giving me a hug, right? So for him it was healing an old wound. And then I found a Gibraltarian, 22, Kyle. He wouldn't give me his surname, and he basically just summed it up, saying this is the future and we've got to move on. So you should ask him in 50 years' time.
Chief Minister, in 50 years' time, how will we view the treaty?
Well, look, that's the judgment that matters, the judgment of history. And I think that it will see that the work that we did was done for a purpose, that it was done to avoid a worse outcome, but that in avoiding a worse outcome, we also became ambitious for what we could do and where we could potentially take Gibraltar. I think that job has been done. It has not been done by me. It has been done by a team. It has been done with remarkable support from the British government, both under a Conservative administration and a Labour administration. And all of that together, none of us pretending that we could have done it alone, but in particular with the effort of Michael Yamas in Gibraltar and Lindsay Appleby in Brussels and in the United Kingdom, we have achieved something that can endure. And I come back to the very first point I made as we started this evening, if we look after it. That's key. Of course, there are other players, and they too must look after it, but we are the key here, and we must look after it. We must recognise that Spain has helped us in this process, no doubt because they determined that it worked for them too, for their own purposes, but that they unlocked the opportunity for the European Union to do this. The Commission is doing a lot of things for many hundreds of millions of people. At the same time as we're doing this, they're negotiating Mercosur, which is 300 million people connecting to 480 million people. And some of those people sat at the table with us connecting 40,000 people to 480 million people. You know? We've really been very lucky with the players. We've produced something that can endure. In 50 years' time, I would be 104. I hope that I'm around then. If I'm not, please can you make sure that nobody buries the thing with me, because I've looked at it enough and I want to rest in eternal peace without it.
I'm not going to be around.
We'll never know. We'll never know, because never mind 50 years, in 15 years' time from now, people will not know what the alternative would have landed us. We will have developed, we will have repositioned our economy, we will have grown, we will have continued to prosper, of that I'm quite confident, and we will never know what would have befallen us had we not done this treaty. And that's the reality. People will come used to it. It'll become the new normal. It'll become the new thing. And this is what political progress is about. This is what government should be about. It should be about the seamless transition of society from a model that no longer works to a model that works better and ensures a continuation of prosperity into the future. That is what politics should be about. And if 15 years from now people can't answer the question that you've posed to us about 50 years from now, it will mean because this will have been a good thing to have done.
But I think
it may be improved. You never know. I mean, one of the things that could happen, there are review clauses, there's more engagement. It could be improved. There are methods to go even further in the context of the relationship with the European Union, and the United Kingdom might have rejoined the EU, and that creates some imponderables in the context of the treaty because of the market in services, etc. So, you know, as ever for Gibraltar, we're not out of the woods yet.
And we'll wait and see. But this is where we have to say goodbye. It's the final viewpoint of the season is on next Thursday, when we talk to outgoing CBF Commander Tom Guy and meet his successor, Commodore Tom Guy, and meet his successor, Commodore Tim Davey. From the panel and myself, it's good night, and thank you very much for joining me. I know it's been a very, very hard week. I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you very much. Good night from all of us.